like pain, now we're free from them chains. Heavy hearts, but we're moving through the rain. Three black brothers with the weight on their minds. Till we rise, till we shine, still we grind. From the darkness to the light we claim. Still humble in the struggle, still proud of our name.
All right, we're back here with season 2, episode 5, and I have another incredible guest with us today. His name is Danny. He has helped other men from all walks of life overcome challenges and things of that nature. So give us a little bit of context about where you're from and what you do, Danny, and then we can get into this conversation.
Sure. I'm Danny L. Ross. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I've been in counseling, give or take, about 20 years. Started out as an educator. I was a teacher, then a school counselor, and then an intervention counselor, and now I'm in practice. Been in practice about 10 years, so I did the job of intervention counselor in my practice at the same time. I got into this work primarily because of a lot of unanswered questions related to the death of my dad. About 4 years old, my dad died, and one of the things that in our families, typically that happens, we don't talk about death and we don't explain it to the young people as to what's going on, what's happening. And I often tell people when we don't talk about things, we tend to fill in the blanks, especially kids. And so I always tell families and others, make sure you share with the kid what's going on, but you do it on their level. But don't just act like they're going to get it by osmosis. So that caused a lot of turmoil and questions for me in my entire life. And one of the things that I used to do music, and I still do music sometimes. And I have an undergrad degree in music, but that used to supersede everything else, and got a scholarship and everything. And one day I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore like this. So I trusted me. And I decided to go back to school and get my master's in counselor education. I loved education for a while, but then I decided I don't necessarily agree with some of the methods. So decided to go back to school and finish my licensure for the licensed professional counselor. And here I am today. And I also supervise those who want to become therapists as well.
So let's take a little bit journey back into your mental health. Because a lot of times I think a lot of therapists that I've seen, I know that the job is about helping other people, and they don't really have to put their own 2 cents into it or their own experiences in there. But it's also nice to have a therapist that I can relate to, that's been through some of the same issues as me. Either marital issues or suicide issues, anything like that nature. So let's take a walk back into your journey. What was young Danny like?
Young Danny was very, very shy, very, very, very curious. I like nature. I like trying to figure things out. But I do remember just having a lot of fears about, is my mom going to die? Just that early fear because of what happened to me with my dad, and nobody talking to me about it. So in that time, I kind of developed I call it a crippling type of shyness, to where I go to class and I would not say one word. The teacher would say, "Oh, I didn't even realize you were here," which is sad. and I just realized I didn't have a voice at that time, because your voice came from what your parents told you needed to be. I'm the son of a Baptist minister. And so your destiny is destined before you even do your own life. You kind of know what you're supposed to be. You're Reverend James Ross's son, and this is how we act. This is what we do. So I learned a lot of how to put on the mask, how to fake the front, and just how to appear okay when I'm really not okay. I probably was depressed my entire life, or most of it. And so I went ahead and started looking into just some things that could be helpful to me. Let me just go back. Oftentimes, there's not a place where you can talk about that as a youngster, and nobody asks you how you feel. And I take all of that into account when I work with clients. I try to meet them where they are. All their stories are unique. They're different. And I think about the young Danny is just as important as the Danny today, because the child within has to continue to be nurtured. And because of the things I experienced, I realized that oftentimes we create a dialogue where you feel like you're unworthy, you're not good enough, you can't do the things necessary, and I'll be better when I lose this 15 pounds. I'll be better when I find that perfect job or that perfect mate. You're good as is. There's nothing more that you need to do for anyone else, but you have to start recognizing that and changing your self-talk. And so part of that is really getting to a place to where, once starting my counseling degree, that's when I realized you got some things going on, and you may have some of what they are talking about in your classes. So it was the first time that I had any revelation of like true mental health issues, and that I may have some as well.
And so let's get more into that, the mental health issues that maybe you experienced as a child. Did you know what anxiety is? Did you know how depression feels?
I did not know what. That's a great question, because I just thought we normalized so much pain, heartache, grief, depression, death. Everything is so normalized to where we're just told to just keep going no matter what. Put on that face, put on that mask. And I always attribute this to not just today, but even yesteryear, when the slavery times. Oftentimes you could not show your emotions. You could not share details of who you were, because certain things were the only things that you could own. You could own your story. You could own your dialogue. You could own your narrative. And Massa wouldn't know that. So even in those instances, we learn to keep things and hold them to ourselves because of the generational dialogue that's happened. Keep your business to yourself. Don't let them people in that school get up in here and know what's going on. I know it all. And I'll be honest, I grew up in Mississippi to where I recognized early on that there was some differences in races and color, but I never really experienced any racism. But I realized I didn't experience it because my mom had set us up in a little box. We don't go to this restaurant over here. And we would drive by it and I would be like, why we never go there? And so to this day was so funny. I find myself going out of my way to go to those places that I couldn't go to as a young person, and just kept changing that narrative as to just not feeling confident, not feeling good enough, and just knowing that racial differences put the narrative in me that you're not supposed to go to that place. So that's a little bit of that.
And I'll share my story too here, just so it's plain even feel here. I kind of grew up without a father. I looked for him. I looked to him for guidance, but it was never received at all. There was no soul in his heart, if I can say that. I looked at him and he never stressed, he never worried, at least to what I've seen. He never showed any emotions, weaknesses. It's always just angerness and bitterness, alcoholism, all of these things that fathers shouldn't really do when they're around their kids.
Right.
And I see so much dysfunctional families. And I was in part of one of those dysfunctional families. And growing up, you just have to accept your circumstances because you don't have any money to go and live on your own. You're 5, 6, 7, 8. Who's going to rent you an apartment? So you have to deal with whatever's going on in your life. And there was a lot of trauma that I had to really unpack and ask myself. And then one of the particular traumas that really even persisted over from childhood into adulthood is just not having a lot of Black men friends. And I think it was because, now that I'm looking back at it, I think it was because of my father and how he treated me. And that was a reflection of how I thought about other Black men. So I stayed away from particularly making a lot of Black friends because I thought that, well, if he treated me wrong this way and talked bad, well, then all Black men are like that. And I had to really learn to unwire that mentality that I had, because that was just so wrong. But I was a kid growing up trying to navigate the world into my early teens and then into my late 20s. And I'm wondering why I don't have a lot of friends that are color.
Right.
And I really had to do a lot of therapy and self-healing to figure out why that was like that. I just did not understand why I wouldn't talk to a lot of Black men and make friends. I would see them and I'd be around them, but I just felt like it was a disconnect. And even they probably felt strange too.
Right.
And I think that if I would have had a better relationship with my father, then it would have been more easily better to make male friends that are Black, because it's not easy. And it didn't help me that I grew up in a suburban area where it wasn't a lot of Black people anyway.
Exactly.
So naturally I had to gravitate to whatever was around my surrounding. But I think just years of therapy, after 2 years of therapy and just self-healing and taking care of myself, I had to really sit down and think about none of them was the issue.
Right.
I was the issue all along. And that was a self-liberation. I was like, wow, it felt like I was racist to my own community. And I didn't realize that internal colorist that I had going on, that probably no one really talks about to this day. But I'm talking about it so I let other men know that maybe that was because of my upbringing and how I saw Black men. So as a therapist, how do you, has someone ever told you that, or is that just completely unnormal?
Oh, I've seen over 900 clients since I've been in my practice, and then working in the school system. I've worked with everything, like you name it, I probably have worked with it. And I've worked at multiracial schools, and I've worked at predominantly Caucasian schools, and just some unique differences in those schools and what I had to learn and grow up. And me being a young man from Mississippi, there was a lot of internal dialogue that I had stored related to what I thought of white people, to just be honest. So I always felt out of place, even in those environments. But I have heard stories like that. I think one of the things is I think we have to tell our stories. I think we have to tell the story so that we can heal, so that we can help others heal. And there is no shame. A lot of us walk around here in shame because we are embarrassed by our stories. I tell people all the time, I love I'm from Mississippi. I love I'm a preacher's kid. I love my upbringing. But was it perfect? No. But I also look at the totality of it all. I got an opportunity to make something of myself. And so that's why I'm so passionate about helping other men. And I tell people all the time, I do a men's group too, second Saturdays of every month. And we talk about many of the things that we've gone through. Our most recent conversation was about Father's Day and Mother's Day. There's some differences in that as to how we're received. And I started off, we've learned how to accept the socks that we really don't want. We've learned how to accept the ties that we don't want, and we never ask for the things that we truly need. And I had one person on there just talking about what he really wanted was time to himself for Father's Day, but he ended up having to take care of the child. And so one of the things I look at is we have to articulate our needs, but we've never truly been empowered to do that in most communities. I'm not saying all, but in most communities, we've never been encouraged to have our voices. And I think from my experience working in the school system that I worked in, at a predominantly white school district, there were some unique things that I had never experienced as a young person or as a teen as to what I saw. One of the biggest things I noticed is the parents wanted the kids to have a voice. They wanted to understand them. They wanted to know how they felt. They wanted to know, like, why is he not making friends? Now, I think about us. We're just like, boy, you better go to that school and do what you need to do. And friends come later, and be more social. And that's about all you're going to get. They would be on the playground talking to me, doing these different things. And then they would have conferences. And I often thought about, too, they were setting their kids up for success from day one. They told them, in a sense, your voice matters. And I always tell people, I said, think about who the leaders are. The leaders are the people who have had a voice and they've learned how to use that voice. I think our voices are silenced most times, so we don't just overtake different things. But I noticed that those kids always saw themselves growing and having more and things like that. So I just think it's so unique as to how we morph into who we are. Because I take all of those experiences into my now, Danny, and into my therapeutic practice. Most of the times, therapy is not built with Black people in mind. Most of the therapeutic approaches are based on Western culture. And so there are a lot of things that I've had to tweak and I've had to change to meet my population. And one of the things that I notice is they kind of tell you to be behind this veil. And most of it is about just dialogue of the client. But that's not how we operate. We're relationally driven. I tell you a little bit, you tell me something. And so those are the kinds of things to where I've had to master conversation while using my therapeutic approaches in a unique kind of way that matches who I'm talking to. So I find that kind of fascinating and fun because half the time they don't know that we're doing therapy. It's just conversational, and it's so just kind of easy, laid back. I said, this is therapy. And most of my guys are like, oh, that's all? We're just talking? I thought you were going to try to read my mind. I'm like, why would I want to do that? I've got my own stuff. I'm very open about, I deal with anxiety. I'm very open about, I deal with depression. I'm open about, I take medication for those things because I want to humanize me. I'm not perfect. I go to therapy. It's too much going on where I have to make sure I'm in a good space to help other people. So it's important that I keep those things in place.
And speaking of just being in the same room as a therapist, my first therapist, I did not have a good first therapist experience. Mm-hmm. I remember it was just a white woman, and she was judging me a lot. Mm-hmm. You know, she would take a little bit of notes here and there, and she was talking at me. She wasn't talking to me. Mm-hmm. Like, she would just say certain things that, like, okay, how do you feel today? What made you feel that way? And I didn't really connect with her on a level that I would somebody that was Black. And we got into it, a lot of arguments, and we got into a lot of, we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of different things. She grew up like Catholic, really reserved, didn't get out and didn't mingle a lot in her social life. Mm-hmm. And when I would tell her about some of the things, I would get into it with some of my guy friends and stuff like that. She would make facial expressions that just was not appropriate, judging me and making it seem like my feelings are not valid and everything to that nature. Just like, this is not working for me. Good. This was the complete opposite of what I wanted. And I had to really cut her off in that sense. But what I did learn from that conversation is that you have to get the right type of therapist. You do. You get anybody, because everybody can't relate to you especially as a Black man. Exactly. And I know there's not a lot of Black men therapists. No, it's really not, and it's sad to say that.
I didn't realize it, and then I was just like, "Oh, you're kind of a gold mine. You really have a great opportunity." So you're exactly right.
And then when I got with another therapist after that one was not going well, then got with another white therapist, but she was everything that I needed.
Oh,
I
good.
was surprised. It's like in my mind, my mentality was like, oh, here we go again. Judgmental conversations, thoughts, and to that nature, and how she would look. But none of that ever happened with her. She was really chill. She was around my age, so she kind of relate to me. She knew sometimes I would not tell her the truth. And then she's like, no, you're not telling me. You're leaving something out. She was very in tune into what I was saying. And I was like, I could never bullshit her at all.
Exactly.
She was just so intact that I was like, how did this white woman know so much about Black people? But again, I would assume there are classes that you guys have to take to be culturally sensitive to other races, right? Or is that not an issue? And so I was assuming that maybe she took some of these classes and she was able to relate to me on a whole nother level. After 2 years, she had to transfer over to the VA hospital to help the veterans. And I was so devastated. I was like, I will never find a therapist like this again. I really missed that connection with her because it felt like it was a friend.
Most definitely.
It didn't feel like it was another therapist. Like, that's how chill her sessions were. She would ask me personal things and I would ask her personal things. Like, we really broke down that barrier between client and therapist. And I was like, to this day, I do have another therapist, but it's like, it's just not the same. Maybe because I'm still getting to know her on another level. This one is a Black woman therapist. So I've had a lot of different therapy.
And I've had several as well. I've had one before my current therapist who was he was good, but I'm silly. I like to laugh. I like to find the humor in life. I don't like to be so serious. And I just didn't get much personality. But the information was good. And I always say, eat the fish, leave the bone. The parts I can use, I use. Those other things are really not as important as I would like. It's just an extra benefit when you can have pretty good relationship with your therapist and laugh a little bit.
So now I want to take the conversation in our last 8 minutes here over to what are some of the tools and methods you use with some of your clients to help them to maybe cope with life? Because I know no one's fully, truly healed. And I had to learn that later on as going through so many different therapies. No one's never truly healed. We just have to develop coping mechanisms, so to speak, to deal with frustrations or different things that come up in our life. We're never truly healed, but what are some of the techniques that you tell some of your clients or have them utilize to cope with life?
Sure.
Because there's always going to be a problem.
Most definitely. And I always empower my clients to realize that they're their own success. I'm just an aid in it, but you have to do the work. And when I find I'm not doing the work, we have to have a come to Jesus meeting. And we got to talk about every time you come in here, you have a stress kind of event happening in your life, which keeps us from working on the plan, which would help many of the things you're dealing with. So I try to teach them, I'm like, yes, we can talk about what's going on in your life that's chaotic and that's crazy, but I also want you to work on getting it better and using some of the techniques and strategies and working on these things so that they can help you throughout your life. I always tell my clients when we first start, sometimes you come in with an idea of what it is, but there's sometimes is an overarching issue that can resolve many of the smaller problems if we work through that overarching issue. So I really spend some time really trying to understand who my client is and what is it they're not telling me. I tell them all the time, I will ask you probably the same question in different ways just to see if you're going to answer differently. And it's a no, because they're catching on. They catch on to my methods. But one thing I really do is I use a lot of transaction analysis theory. And transaction analysis theory is about the messages that we receive from the parent, the adult in our lives. So teachers can represent the parent, principals, doctors, lawyers, uncles and aunts. They represent the parent. And they send us messages and transcripts and tell us what's right and wrong and how bad we are, how good we are. And those transcripts and messages, they stay with us into adulthood. And then there's a child who's receiving the messages. And the child operates in vulnerability. They're the message takers. And just think about this. Oftentimes, the child never moves past their expression and how they deal with things related to the parents in their life. And so sometimes you have this parent-child dynamic that's happening in adult relationships. That child tends to continually show up in adult conversations. And what I try to get my clients to do is move from parent to child to adult to adult. You do not have to stay in a child's place because you have graduated to take care of yourself. And sometimes I really do feel like I free people just by telling them, you get to be an adult now. You get to challenge mom. You get to challenge that person. And you don't always have to verbally say it. You can show up as yourself.
But to hit on to that point, some people never graduated from childhood. They
Exactly.
still have that child mentality mindset that they need that codependent. They need to depend on their mother and their father for everything because they never learned to graduate from that. Why do you think that happens in an adult? It was typically it's supposed to be adult relationships, but it was saying it's a child adult relationship. Why do you think that happens?
Partly we have been given these messages. There's this, don't be disrespectful. I'm your mama. I raised you. I did, or your daddy. Well, you don't get to raise me my entire life. Sometimes we have never been told that we get to make our own choices. And I think it's also about just the narrative that you've been told, what you've been led to believe, because think about this. The successful one is typically the one who is the person that takes on the challenges, the responsibility of things going on for maybe the parent or the person who didn't have the same opportunity. So you bear that burden, but I also believe in putting boundaries in place. Don't take away from yourself while you struggling yourself, but you sitting there trying to pay the rent. Foolishness. I see, this is how I am in session. But I find it really, it helps the dialogue. And so we laugh, we clown a little bit, but we come back to the questions. We also talk about, I'm doing a lot of work with healing the wounded inner child. Oftentimes we have to challenge those narratives and those things that we've been told about ourselves, how we view ourselves, how we just operate with others. And you ask me, how do we get to this place? Because we're never empowered to think differently. Oftentimes when we've experienced some type of trauma or some type of issue, our emotional ability to process and cope with things stays at that same level as to where you were put in your place emotionally. So if you never graduate from that place and learn to use your emotions, you show up as that child all the time. And I think, honestly, there are a lot of us men who need to do some work related to our childhood wounds, because we don't show up in a very loving way. We don't show up in a very emotional way. I tell parents, and I tell some of the women, I said, you can't take on his emotional burdens. He has to understand and manage his own emotions. But the reason he doesn't manage his emotions is because you take them. You keep him from an opportunity to better himself, to show himself that he can handle his own life. But oftentimes they put the emotional nurturing and experience on the woman. And she's supposed to self-soothe. No, learn to self-soothe.
She's supposed
yourself.
to be the wife, the spouse, not the mama. He already had a mama.
But oftentimes we're in relationships with one of our parents, both sides. And you wonder why this ain't working. You with your mama, you with your daddy. What you think? You didn't care for them, but they have the same characteristics of the relationship you have with your partner. And so I always tell people, I say, you know what? In relationships, we really have to do the work necessary to be in relationships. And I would say, if we're going to do couples counseling, you need your own individual counselor, because there are some conversations you need to process with a therapist one-on-one. You don't need to go to your house and start talking about the stuff that wreaks havoc in your life, because oftentimes you don't have the tools just yet. When you have the tools, you can communicate in a more effective way. I think I went over my time. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, that's good. We still have a couple of minutes here left anyway. Okay. And I wanted to know, what techniques do you use in your own personal life that you teach other people, that you teach other men about to get better in their life? What tools do you use? Do you utilize your tools, or do you use different tools?
Most definitely. Self-care, cognitive distortions, and self-talk. Those are the three main things that I have to keep in my back pocket. And then I do this little thing to where I give clients, it's called a pocket pal. And in the pocket pal, you kind of write down who are your support people, what are your favorite scriptures that kind of get you out of the dumps, what's your favorite quote. And so when you're having that hard day, it gives you something to go to versus doing something destructive. Cognitive distortions are about the messages that we keep playing to ourselves over and over, the filtering, the cognitive distortions of black and white, all of those kinds of things. Because it happened this way in the past, I've set up a narrative that says, ooh, everybody else gonna treat me just this way. No, bro, it was just two people. It was just two people who did this specific thing to you. So don't blame the entire world on what 2 to 5 people did. When you really think about it, there's probably about 5 people who've been really not supportive or put those negative messages in our lives. So sometimes I have to put myself in a place of truth, and I have to challenge myself. And I also have to tell myself the wonderful things about myself through my self-talk. I'm amazing. I'm wonderful. I was built for this. I have an abundance of accolades. I have people who tell me I've changed their lives, because sometimes as a therapist, you feel like you don't always hit the mark.
But wouldn't that be, what I wanted to say, a deflection? Because you're like, sometimes people, they hype up, oh, I got this, I got that. Mm-hmm. But they're breaking down inside to try to make up for something else. You get what I'm saying there? They beat themselves up, all of the things that they accomplish in their life, but they're really breaking down internally. Is that a form of coping mechanism with their life?
Well, a lot of times,
really deflection.
I think part of it, I think I'm understanding, but I think part of what I'm hearing too is sometimes we beat ourselves up to get us to move, to get us to motivated, and I'm just like, that's also detrimental too, because it sets yourself up to say, I have to talk down to myself, or I have to be mean to myself, or talk about how bad I am and how I should be doing something to where is not helpful to your psyche. And it just connects to that child on the other end who doesn't feel comfortable. So for me, it all kind of aligns. It's all about challenging the messages that we're telling ourselves. Is this a lie, or is this the truth? Sometimes it's as simple as that. If you don't have evidence, it is not truth. Just because you think something is doesn't mean it's so.
All right. For my last question here, and then I'll let you go.
Sure.
This is a really good conversation. I like the natural flow conversations that happen here. But I want to ask, do you have a therapist? Since
most definitely.
I never asked that question, because I always wonder, do therapists have therapists themselves?
Oh, most definitely.
Because they need to relieve all of the tension that maybe all the clients stacked onto them, but burden them on.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely.
And they need someone to talk to too, right? So take us through that journey for a little bit.
I tell you, one of the things to me, I have to remember, every time I go to therapy, you have these little butterflies in your stomach, because it's like you're very vulnerable. And so many of the things that I take that with me when I go do my own work, that feeling of uneasiness. and just making sure that I'm always respectful to my clients, and I'm appreciative for them sharing their stories and allowing me into those spaces. And with my particular therapist that I've had in the past, I had one who it's narrative therapy. He would just sit there and I spill my guts, and I'm just looking for some reflection to help me get through it. No suggestions, no solutions. It's just like you pulled off my scab and now you're not going to do anything. And so after that, I had a very bad perception of therapy. Even having a school counselor background, even then, I was just like, and sometimes as therapists, we judge techniques, and I'm just like, is he using cognitive distortion? Is he using CBT, or is he using, it's so many different so solution focused. And for me, honestly, that's important. When I do supervision with my clients, the people that I teach to become therapists, I always tell them, I said, make sure everything that you do has a theoretical perspective and the why behind it is connected to something that you can defend. If you don't know what you're doing, don't just be up in here giving advice. I just say, listen. When in doubt, listen and just be reflective. Parrot questions. And I always just say, if we remain curious, so much of this can be handled through curiosity, just an honest curiosity to understand other people and how they operate, and not expecting them to be like you.
All right, that is all the time we have today, Danny, but I do thank you for being vulnerable. I know it's hard for you to be on that other end where I'm asking you questions because you normally ask your clients questions and stuff like that. But I'm glad she was able to break down. I go through some of the same issues
Most definitely.
as men that's sitting on my couch or whatever the counseling is taking place go through.
Exactly.
So it's really about understanding that we all can heal no matter where we're at in life. We could be the top therapist in the world, but we still have problems.
That's right.
We can be a talk show host or whatever, and we're interviewing. That doesn't mean that the people that come on that, oh, I'm perfect, I'm here,
right,
and I'm just want to get all your secrets and thoughts and stuff like that. But it's more of a conversational flow, and I do thank you for being so vulnerable and appreciative.
Thank you for allowing me to share with you.
And if you ever want to come back on, I host a show with 2 other guys. If you ever want to come on, let me know that. I'm gonna make sure that also I'm gonna send the link to you here. So when the video will be a while before it gets posted, but I'll let you know when it does. And also, if you have any other friends that wants to come on, send them my way through LinkedIn. That would be anybody that's another therapist or a general guy that's going through it. We always need more than the guests, right?
Oh, I have great conversational friends who add a lot of insight into my life, and they've been on podcasts, and I'll send them your way. I think they would really work well for your space.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.